I'm afraid that this second half has been quite a while in coming. I've had a fairly difficult month this month with health and everything else. But you might notice as my hairstyle is a little different from part one, and two teeth extracted, and COVID. So it's been a busy month. Anyway, here we go. Shadow, part two. Dictionary, shadow. Noun. As an inseparable attendant or companion, accompanying either one or more people for leadership purposes. And four, a person secretly following and observing another. Example, no matter where Johnson went, his shadow stayed with him. As a verb, to follow and observe someone closely and secretly. Shadow, part two. Shadrach was becoming a little more proud of himself because of the amount of time he had spent in the library, studying anything and everything to do with the subject of light and shadows. The librarian was the first person to offer some compliment to him for having been such a studious individual. He actually believed that he had become, possible, the most learned individual with respect to light and shadows in the city. He began to think that he had some power over light and shadows. But it was this particular thought that was the start of a battle of which he had absolutely no prior knowledge, nor any indication that might be possible for any thought to be responsible for what was about to happen. Oh, I've got to stop that as well. He actually believed that he had become, possibly, the most learned individual with respect to light and shadows in the city. He began to think that he had some power over light and shadows. But it was this particular thought that was the start of a battle of which he had absolutely no prior knowledge, nor any indication that might be possible for any thought to be responsible for what was about to happen. On his way to the Lord Mayor's office, he was practicing what he would say to the members of the meeting in terms of advising them what they should or should not do with respect to illuminations within the city through the winter months. It happened to be a very bright day once again, and he noticed that his shadow had a very, very sharp definition without any fuzziness describing the actual edges of his shadow that would be typical of a less bright day. Looking slightly more intent at this dark and sharp image attached to his feet, mimicking his movements, he noticed that the shadow was very slightly out of sync with his body movement. As he walked along with no more than about 500 meters to go to his meeting point, he actually watched as his shadow became less and less coordinated with his own body movements. This perplexed him to a great degree, so he started trying to understand what could possibly cause this highly unusual exhibition of his body's shadow worsening so quickly as to be quite visible in terms of the rate of deterioration. Suddenly, one of the shadow's legs, connected to his left foot, actually separated from himself, leaving the shadow of his right foot still remaining attached. Dumbfounded, he took the next 2 or 3 steps. Having walked an additional 3 more meters, the shadow connected to his right foot suddenly separated, leaving him walking in bright sunlight with his separated shadow mimicking his movements, yet not in sync. He was flabbergasted. He was actually completely flummoxed, but on top of that, he was quite frightened, because all of the learning he had accomplished from the previous few months had informed him that it was absolutely not possible for any shadow to be disconnected from the body, which would be blocking the brighter light and would in turn create that shadow. What was he to do? He did not know. He decided that as the shadow was now independent of his body, he would quicken his step and try to distance himself from it, thereby giving him an extra moment or two to try and understand what was happening. What he did not count on was the speed with which the shadow stopped, then seemed to turn towards him and run at his body. In his alarm, he raised his arms as a form of protection to his head, not knowing what was going to happen. Was his own shadow going to attack him? He could not envisage such a thing. Nothing in the history of the galaxy, as far as he understood, had ever happened to anybody else like this. He was now quite close to the entrance of the building in which he was to offer his recommendations. He thought that if he made a dash for it, he could leave the rather dangerous-looking shadow behind, providing himself sanctions inside the building. What he had not counted upon was the speed at which the shadow acted. It leapt at his body, flinging its arms round Shadrach's neck, putting a stranglehold on him, preventing him from taking any breath. His mental stimulation was so acute that his heart rate had considerably been elevated along with his blood pressure, but the arms of the shadow were so severely clamped round his neck as to prevent any further breath being taken. This, in turn, helped increase the pressure of the blood inside his cranium, eventually causing a rupture of the main artery to his brain. One of the most peculiar things that possibly could have happened took place. As soon as his heart had stopped beating, the shadow released its stranglehold. A cloud suddenly appeared in front of the sun, obliterated any shadows anywhere close by, including the murderous shadow, which was totally separated from Shadrach's body, because the cloud prevented the sun from shining. To the passers-by, all they could see was the form of poor Shadrach lying on the ground, lying motionless and absolutely dead. Shadrach's shadow never appeared again, as it had become completely free of its captivity of Shadrach's own body. Shadrach's murder was never solved. So all of you readers and listeners, just be careful the next time you walk outside when it's bright. You might be under scrutiny and possibly being shadowed. The end.